It's the Misfits.
Hey everybody, look who it is! I'm back! It's Brandon!
Yeah.
He does exist. Everybody still is convinced. We did have one person ask if Bluebeard had taken over and left you behind, but no, Brandon's here.
Came back.
Bluebeard has not taken over.
Just the 7 C's.
Just the 7 C's, yes. Captain Bluebeard of the 7 shows. Now, Brandon is back. And Brandon is back specifically because we still have Fruits of the Spirit to do.
That's right. That's why I had to ask you. I was like, how many do we have left? Because I thought we were pretty much done, but we learned we had more than we thought.
We think we have 3 left that are actually like listed on the whole like grocery store that we have in Galatians 5.
Mm-hmm.
There are more that we have to do beyond those 3, but we have 3 specifically out of Galatians 5 that everybody's expecting us to do. Now, today, we are going to continue that. We're going to do it a little bit differently, because normally, we go to Webster's. Webster's tells us something that everybody's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what it means. And then we go to the Greek, and we go to the Hebrew, and like, this is nothing at all like what we just read, and we have to spend the entire time contrasting the two.
Yes.
And then it's very easy to see why it's fruit of the Spirit, because the Spirit makes it something different, right? Today, that's not what we have. Today is going to be a little bit more difficult, but also should be easier at the same time, because people aren't going to get confused by what we mean when we say the word. Because we are going to look at ones that the biblical definition and the generic, secular, Webster's, cultural, whatever you want to call it, definition are almost the same. So much the same that it's okay if we a little bit. So we are going to actually have to sit down and look at why these are fruits of the Spirit in the first place, because obviously anybody can show them. And so we are looking at 2 different passages today. Or passages. We're looking at 2 different
fruits of the Spirit.
There we go. Fruits today. We are looking at joy, and we are looking at patience. Now, Brandon, to start with, I'm curious, because joy is one that you would think, based off of how you talk to people in church that grew up in evangelicalism at least, joy is something that is not the dictionary definition, right? Joy is something that can't have unless you're a Christian. Is that typically how you grew up hearing about it?
I actually didn't. Again, it was always the distinct definition of happiness versus joy, and so one was fleeting with happiness, and joy was more of a long-standing. It wasn't as ebb and flow of what maybe the emotion might feel like. But I never really had it defined to me as 2 distinct. Whether you're a Christian, you can have joy, and if you're not, you can't.
So that's interesting, because typically what you just said you grew up with is where people end up drawing the line between why Christians can have joy and non-Christians can't. Is that joy and happiness are typically contrasted. And then joy is what Christians can have because it's a fruit of the Spirit, and happiness is what everybody else has. And typically it's used that way because, like you just said, happiness is temporary. Yeah. It goes away. And so typically what I've always heard people try to use it with is that happiness is the worldly version of joy, and that's why it's fleeting. That's why everybody's always depressed all the time. And that's why you can't actually be happy unless you're a Christian. It's much more of a transactional approach to Christianity again than it is anything else. Patience, how have you, if you needed to define patience to somebody, what would you typically say?
I would say the act of waiting on something or someone. And obviously within that, there's a lot of, if we get to more of the biblical side of things, there's the active waiting, where with patience, you're still continuing to do things while you're in that waiting period of being patient. Other times, it's just, you are actually just waiting.
So that is typically what we hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it's going to be real fun, because even the way we comprehend patience is not even actually the secular, cultural, dictionary, whatever, actual way that patience is supposed to be described. What you describe is just waiting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's not actually patience.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, once we say that, like, you're nodding your head, you agree with that. Waiting and patience are not the same thing.
Correct.
But yet that's the only way we ever tend to be able to describe it.
Yeah, because that's what we tell the kids, right? When you're waiting in line or you're at the grocery store, you're at the drive-thru, be patient.
Be patient, be patient, be patient. But like you said, there's an active quality to the waiting.
Yes.
And that's what we're going to get into. But we're going to start. We are still going to go our typical route to get to everything.
Go on to Webster's.
We are going to go to Webster's for a minute, because we need to actually look at what we're actually dealing with before we can get anywhere else. So with joy, Webster says it's a feeling of great pleasure and happiness,
mm-hmm.
which now gives us a problem. How can we say that joy and happiness are contrasted if the definition of joy is happiness?
Yeah, again, I think part of the flaw that we try to do sometimes is, again, we try to define, well, you're not happy, or you're not joyful, you're happy. And so we try to define the other person's emotions or what they're feeling.
We're trying to do what? We're trying to find their
emotions.
Mm-hmm. That's what this is, much more of a mental health side of the discussion than what we're going to get into with the fruits of the Spirit. But part of the reason why we have a hard time being able to say somebody has joy that we think shouldn't have joy is because what they view as making them happy, or how they express their happiness, doesn't fit with what we think it should look like.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more, it's a projection thing.
Yes.
That's part of the reason why we struggle with the idea of, well, I would rather have joy than happiness. Joy and happiness actually do go together, and we'll see why they go together more so when we start talking about the fruits of the Spirit as we move through all of this. Mm-hmm. So that's the English. Within Hebrew, we have one main word, which is samach, and it's about rejoicing and being glad. Now, typically, when we talk about rejoice, it's a celebration.
Yes.
Or it's worship,
mm-hmm.
which that's one place where we can draw a line between a faith-driven joy and a non-faith-driven joy, is that typically what we're dealing with, there is a little bit of an aspect of worship involved, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get to that a little bit further down the line as far as what the distinction actually is there. In the Greek, there's a couple of words for rejoice, there's a couple of words for happiness, but when we actually get the one that is the fruit of the Spirit, it's chero, to rejoice or to be glad, which is the same definition we just read for the Hebrew word samach.
Mm-hmm.
So the concept here is one that is the same both within the Old Testament and the New Testament, which is an important thing for us to remember as we move through all of this. Now, patience, and this is where we may have to spend a little bit more time on the English than we did with the other one. Because like you said, normally we talk about patience with
just waiting.
Patience is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset. That's way different than just waiting.
Yeah, because really all you're doing is, I don't say masking, you're
not masking.
You're covering your true emotions, though, of what you want to express.
Is it actually covering? Because, let me read it again. The capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset. Well, masking is what we want people to do, right? If we're telling them patient, we just mean for them to wait mm-hmm. without whining. That would be a masking.
Yeah.
Patience, and this is part, I like the way you said it earlier. There's an active quality to the waiting.
Mm-hmm.
That is much more of what we're dealing with when we're talking about the English side of it. Masking is much more of the masking side is definitely what we just talked about as far as the happiness and joy side of it. We want people to show their emotions the way we want them to show it, and that's why we won't grant them that they're happy or joyful.
Yeah.
patience, already we're getting into much more of what we typically get into. Like, this is the Greek and the Hebrew way of doing things, which is way more complicated than the English. The English is way more complicated than we ever give it credit.
Yeah. And I think it's what I meant by the masking was we talked about a lot with Galatians. It first defines the fruits of the flesh, right, and the fruits of the Spirit. So what we're maybe trying to cover, I should say, not mask, is our natural tendencies, as it has here in the English definition, to be angry or upset, because that's our default emotion. I would say typically when we are troubled, delayed, or go through suffering, that's our first immediate response. So that's kind of what I meant by the masking on that definition of it's not our immediate response typically.
It's a learned response.
Yes.
And that is part of the thing. In order for us to be able to accept or tolerate something, we have to learn how to do that. Mm-hmm. That's part of the hard thing when we do this stuff. This is one thing, you're about to experience this. But as a parent, one of the things you have to learn is you can't just expect them to be patient. Part of the things that I am always having to say is you need to learn how to be patient. It is not a be patient, because they can't.
Yeah.
It's a learn how to be patient. And this is something, we can actually go back into the upper part of Galatians 5 and see that it has to be learned. Because what are the works of the flesh? Sexual immorality, moral impurity, promiscuity, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, decision, factions, envy, drunkenness, cruising, anything similar. The things that we just read that patience says that you're not going to do would be hatred, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition. Mm-hmm. Those are automatically our go-to responses.
Yes.
Patience is something that's saying don't do that. Mm-hmm. And learn how to not do that. And this is where it's going to get very interesting as we walk through this, is that according to the definitions, it can be learned outside of the Spirit. But can it really? That's what we're going to find out.
Exactly. Because if we think about it from the human standpoint, the non-biblical side, which also carries it to the biblical point, and what I'll say here is that there's patience and things that you are good at or bad at in different areas.
Yes.
So for myself, patience while I'm driving is not my forte. The runner inside of me thinks I got to pass everybody and get through the lanes, and this is the set speed I'm going. So if you're going too slow, get out of the way, because I am impatient when I'm trying to get from point A to point B. But there's other spaces where I might be more patient on waiting for my food in line at the drive-thru, because I'm like, okay, I know the end result. I'll be satisfied.
You are much more patient, I'm sure, than my 3-year-old when we're in the drive-thru.
Probably.
Now, the other interesting thing, the way that you're talking about, is that it's very similar, again, to what we're dealing with when we talk about the whole joy and happiness thing. Mm-hmm. Is that part of you find yourself to be more patient in some areas and less patient in others.
Yeah.
Whereas the people that you're getting impatient with on the highway are probably thinking that you need to learn patience because this is the correct way to go.
Yeah.
We're back to where we're projecting our ideas of what this should look like onto other people before we can even have the emotion. Mm-hmm. Now, the Hebrew for this...
Ooh, I'm going to throw something else in here before... sorry, go back to the driving definition a little bit.
We're going to spend the rest of the episode talking about driving styles.
Well, because I think there might be a biblical implication to this too. So typically when you're driving and you're impatient, part of it is because you plan to get from point A to point B in a specific time, and you maybe waited or you were too late. So you've created less of a space to be patient because you're this close to the clock as far as, all right, I have to get to work by 8. The latest I can leave is 7:50. So when you leave at 7:50, you're giving yourself 0 time to be patient or, say, tolerable. And so I think sometimes we create the chaos for ourselves to be in a space of impatience, even though we don't like to admit it.
We create the chaos.
Yeah.
That needs to be a t-shirt. But actually what you're dealing with is much more of what we see when we get into the Hebrew definitions as far as where we see patience show up in the Old Testament. Because the first one, and this is where you're going to be like, why'd you tell me I was wrong? The first word is you call, which is to wait or await. Now, what's the difference between to wait for something and to await something? There's a little bit of a difference. I'm curious if you're going to be able to give me the difference.
Is one something that you know is expected to happen, and one is you're, I want to say, hoping for?
That's a good way of putting it. Waiting on something. The Israelites were waiting to get into the promised land for 40 years, right? They knew it was coming. They just didn't know when, and they were just impatient because it was horrible in the desert, right? Yeah. But the people of Israel awaited the Messiah for thousands of years. They had hope it was coming. They knew God was going to keep his promise, but they had no idea if they were ever going to see it or not. Mm-hmm. There's a big difference between waiting and awaiting because, again, it requires action involved. Awaiting is an act of faith. Waiting is an act of patience when it's done right.
Yeah.
Not when you're asking where the fries is before we've even ordered. The other words, there's two other words we're going to go with. Kavah, which is to wait for, which is much more like the awaiting, right? You are waiting for it to happen. You just don't know when. Mm-hmm. And then a rock is to be long. And that's three words. To be long. To long after or to endure. That is where we get into much more of the active side of things. It's much more about how you are going to react in the midst of waiting. Going back to the English, it is the capacity of being able to deal with the delay, the trouble, the suffering without getting angry or upset. Are you going to endure? Mm-hmm. That's not normally, we normally just talk about endurance with that. We don't actually talk about that as the fact that is actually what patience is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
It changes it a little bit. You are an endurance runner. Mm-hmm. You had to train.
Yeah.
I am not an endurance runner. I was a catcher. We don't run, right?
Yeah. Maybe our endurance once.
My endurance level was much more of being able to withstand the beating. Mm-hmm. Your endurance level was to get away from the beating as fast as possible. That was a joke.
I know. It
was a joke.
Yes.
That's a big difference in training style, but it was both endurance.
But I also think, too, with the endurance running is a lot of people, they don't realize you're just typically constantly in some form of pain. Like,
now, anybody that has run knows full well that if you are running, you are always in a constant state of pain.
And obviously your body, like you said, trains up for different things, so your lungs or legs don't feel as bad. But to some capacity, you're not really like going on a 10-mile run and you're like, wow, everything feels 100%. Like you know how to endure through the pain. And then at the beginning of the journey, typically like when we start something new, you feel great. The first few miles feel fine. And midway through, start getting a little more tired. And then towards the end, you start contemplating. You're like trying to find things to motivate you to get to the end goal.
And it's about motivation there, mm-hmm. which is more so of why awaiting fits with endurance to create patience. The goal is to see what you are longing after. And so it's worth going through the pain and the trials and everything else if you are going to get to your goal. Mm-hmm. The Greek has one word that's actually two words, which this is where it gets complicated with patience. Is not the definitions themselves don't fit with English. It's just that there's either three words or it's one word that's actually two words. So the Greek is makrothumio, which is to persevere, endure, or to be patient, which doesn't really help because we're now defining the word with the word. But it makes more sense when we actually get into why they use that to be patient. It is two words, macro and thumio, that they just throw together because that's what the Greeks do. Macro, and this is M-A-K-R-O, not M-A-C-R-O.
Yeah, the marketing person in me came in. I was like, wait, that's not right.
But it actually isn't that far off because macro, typically when we're talking M-A-C-R-O, means what?
Like the large,
scale, right?
Yeah.
Macros is long, far, and distant. So we are still dealing with big areas. Mm-hmm. But now we're dealing with time. It's long, it's far, it's distant, it's off. It's in the future somewhere. Whether that's running distance, that's still time. Mm-hmm. Especially, I don't know if you've ever seen, have you ever seen the people from Europe that are just so confused when they ask Americans for directions.
Oh,
why?
Because we say it's in
we measure everything in time. We don't measure anything in miles, because 1 mile
or kilometers.
Yeah, 1 mile. Well, if you're the British use miles too. I'm just saying. But if so, you have grown up here, hills, mini mountains, because this is Appalachia after all. A mile can be anywhere from a couple minute drive, a couple minute run.
Mm-hmm.
To you don't want to finish the said mile because you're going straight up a straight incline and you should be on an elevator, not be running.
Yes.
I grew up in Illinois. The highest elevation point, natural elevation point in Illinois is just literally some hill in a random lady's backyard. A mile for me was pretty much just a straight up, it was about a 3.5 minute bike ride. Mm-hmm. For a mile. It was about, depending on which road you're on, 1 to 2 minutes, because it was all just flat, no incline whatsoever. Minutes make much more sense when you're dealing with that much of a broad landscape than actually measuring it in miles.
Yeah, obviously we're biased, but I was like, I like ours better because you
know what to expect.
Yeah, you're giving somebody the expectation for the journey. Like you said, I remember one race specifically, it was a 1/2 mile on a cross-country ski course uphill. My legs have never hurt so bad. So if I was to tell somebody that experience...
It was only 1/2 mile.
Yeah, but you're like, when you're in the moment of running up that hill, your legs burn so bad that you're going to tell somebody, well, it's probably going to take you a good 4 minutes to get up that 1/2 mile hill versus a flat path. They're like, well, it's going to be a lot easier.
Here's the difference between you and I, is when you said that, I was thinking at least 7 minutes. And you're like, it's a good 4 minutes, maybe.
It's actually probably less than that, but I won't.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, well, yeah, we'll persevere.
Joy.
But the whole point of that is the fact that we're dealing with a long period. But part of what you said there, I think, is worth noting, is that part of why we prefer knowing the timeline rather than the distance is that the timeline, we know how long we have to wait.
Mm-hmm.
The distance, we don't know how long we're going to have to wait. We aren't as patient as we think we are, because we always are going to default to what's going to be the easiest for us to get through.
Yeah.
Which, that's just a side note to throw out there. Even if you think you got this down, you don't got this down.
Well, I think that's the big key in, I know we'll get into it, of, well, what makes this a fruit of the Spirit? But with patience, it's a control factor to be able to say, I'm not in control, because you could take the distance of maybe not use a mile from, to get from a city to a city. You can say, I can wait on the bus and get there from point A to point B, or I can get my car and drive and be in control, or I can hop on a plane and get there faster. And I think sometimes we like to do that with God of, all right, here's point A to point B. I can get there faster and achieve what I want, so I'm going to take the control and do that instead of being patient.
Well, and here's the funny thing with that too, is it just jogged my memory of a Mythbusters thing. Is, part of what you said is like, well, I can just jump in a plane and get there faster than if I have to drive. That sometimes is true. But it's not always true, because what they found was that anything under 4 hours of a flight, the drive will get you there in almost the exact same amount of time as the flight. But we think that the flight's going to get us there faster because we're flying, and we don't have to do anything. We just get to sit there. We're not going to be getting worn out. We're not going to be getting impatient with other drivers. We're just going to like, well, this is obviously the fastest way to travel, so it doesn't feel like I'm having to be patient or wait.
Mm-hmm.
When the reality is,
it took longer to get there.
It may have even took longer to get there in the first place.
On top of that, bust the myth further, is, again, where God talks a lot about like money, the root of all evil.
And so, how much money did you just spend on the plane tickets? Well, gas at the moment.
So this is what I was going to say is, again, we get to the point, we do this with God in different capacities where, okay, I know that the commercial flight's going to cost more, but I have enough money to get a private jet in there, so it doesn't matter because I can get there faster and there is no wasted time. So again, we continue to build up our resources to say, I am better,
to
faster.
make it so I don't have to wait.
Yes, to speed things up in the process, and we use our own power and resources that we've created for ourselves and not recognizing it to speed up the process.
And we do it because we think it's going to make us happier. And happiness and joy are the same thing, so now it's making me more joyful. Just to connect it back.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, that does connect us to the other Greek word that is part of the actual Greek word, which is thumio, or thumos, which means passion. So what we're actually dealing with the Greek concept here is to take our passion a far distance. That's not the same thing as just waiting.
Mm-mm.
There is definite action involved here, which is why what we just described as far as what people will do to avoid the long car ride definitely does not fit within the Greek concept, at least, of what patience actually is. Unless you are going a long way to your passion of not having to drive. So we're going to deal with that a little bit longer as far as what that actually means then, after we deal with the other one. Because this is when we started the conversation. We have the definitions now. We have gone round and round and round about the fact that even though they're the same, they're not the same even though they are the same. And the reason they're not the same is just because we don't even know what we actually know.
Yeah.
So, the joy and happiness debate. We're going to actually break it down now. Because again, this is where most of the somewhat problematic conversations happen. Because unfortunately, the joy versus happiness conversation in our churches is part of what has prolonged the horrible ways that mental health has been talked about within the church. Happiness is seen as fleeting and seen as worldly, and so that's not what our goal is. We want joy because that's the fruit of the Spirit, and so joy obviously must be different than happiness, and so Christians have joy, and that's why if you have joy, it's everlasting because it's fruit of the Spirit, and so if you are ever feeling down about anything, either cover it up when you're in our churches, or you must have sin in your life and the Spirit has left you.
Mm-hmm.
That's not at all what we just looked at when we look at the actual definitions here.
No.
What is the actual difference between joy and happiness?
Do you want the biblical sense?
Well, either one. Because honestly, they are actually the same thing here.
Because I think with joy, it's I'm trying not to use that same word in the definition, but it's like the delight, the rejoicing in what you know God is doing or has promised to do, and you're seeing parts of it revealed and fulfilled.
Ooh, I like that. Let's keep going with that before we get into the non-biblical answer here. So we already talked about the idea. Rejoicing typically is an aspect of worship.
Mm-hmm.
That side of it is something that is not limited to Christians either, because rejoicing was going on within Old Testament Israel as well. So obviously it's something that is just a part of a faith journey. The idea of when you are overjoyed and rejoice, it is in worship to whatever you are having your faith in.
Yeah.
From a Christian standpoint that we're going with now, go a little bit deeper, because part of what you said there is why we also are combining joy and patience together.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily that you weren't joyful or happy before, but that it comes about more so when you are seeing aspects of God's promises to you revealed. So what does that look like? What are we talking about?
Yeah, or just even aspects of God's character.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of it, I guess same as patience, a lot of, I think, of joy is it takes time to truly uncover and enjoy it. Part of it to know God's goodness and see it through fruition, which some of which we don't see in our lifetime. But we can see the passing of a loved one, and as you said, still be saddened by their passing, but rejoice knowing that they loved Jesus and Like they get to be reunited with their maker again.
Well, we can take it a step further because I know you've done the study because I was with you when we did the study.
I can't say
sadness would be the opposite of happiness, right?
Yes.
So obviously, if you're sad, you cannot be happy.
Mm-hmm.
But we already have talked about, at least for the fruit of the Spirit style of joy, there's an aspect of worship involved. And so you can rejoice even in the midst of sadness.
Mm-hmm.
What do we actually call that? Let's see if you can remember back. I know you were a part of the study. You were sitting next to me.
No cop-outs here. Rejoice in the midst of sadness
Starts with an L.
Oh, lament.
It's lament, right? A lament is deep sadness, sometimes even depression.
Mm-hmm.
But that can manifest itself through worship.
Yeah.
Joy can still be there in the midst of depression.
Mm-hmm.
Even if happiness is not there, joy can still be there because, and this is the fun part, go back, see if you can go back and look at the English definition for joy again. It's a feeling of great pleasure or
happiness.
Happiness is the emotional goal you're longing for.
Mm-hmm.
And so an act of worship is really a prayer for what? In this case, the act of worship is not just we're worshiping God because we're worshiping God, even though that is part of it.
Yeah.
We're allowed in the midst of that to make requests to God.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that our request is?
I would say probably to, in that case, lessen the suffering or help us persevere or endure towards happiness.
Which is what?
Patience.
We're already into why these things are fruits of the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Is because we as believers can seek out joy in the midst of suffering because joy is not there by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Joy comes with love. And the love of God allows us to endure. Patience, which allows us to renew our faithfulness. And now we're working our way through. Joy and happiness are not opposites.
Mm-hmm.
Joy is a way that we express our happiness, but the happiness does not even have to be there in order for us to express joy if our joy is centered on Christ.
Yeah.
It's Christocentric. It doesn't mean that you cannot be joyful about other things.
Mm-hmm.
But it's other things in light of what Christ has done, which is why I like the definition you gave for it, of the idea of that joy is much more about seeing parts of God's promise to us than it is about actually receiving anything.
Yeah, and I think that this is not an always thing, but with joy, a lot of times it's joy for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I see it exuded, where maybe it's almost like a sense of you're proud of them in a way that if you see somebody do something, or your kids or somebody else, that you're like, wow, I'm proud of seeing your God-given ability or talent that you have, like fully be embraced by what you're doing and using it to its capacity. There's that sense of accomplishment that you're having through somebody else, not really of anything that you did, but because of what they're
and it doesn't even necessarily even have to be with what they've done. Oftentimes it is brought on by seeing their response.
Mm-hmm.
They are rejoicing, and we can't help but rejoice with them.
Yeah.
That's a big thing, especially when we start getting super spiritual and super faith-driven when we talk about the community of believers. What are we called to do? Out of Philippians 4, we are supposed to rejoice with those that rejoice. Mm. But we are also supposed to weep with those that are weeping. We're supposed to bear each other's burdens. We're also supposed to bear each other's accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the community as a whole, which also plays into the joy versus happiness debate a little bit, is that people, unfortunately, are going to, now we're back to the first part of our discussion, if you aren't showing joy and happiness the way I think you should, it now affects the way that I am going to rejoice, in which case now we have a big problem and we can't worship together because you aren't doing it right, which we had this discussion even going back to the worship episode we did. What's the problem with that? Besides the fact that we already know it's selfish, and that's not at all what we're dealing with, because selfishness was already part of the fruits of the flesh that we already talked about.
Yeah.
But what's the bigger issue here? Where is joy being found then?
Are you saying like in our day-to-day of worshiping God from
I'm
our
saying
experience?
if we are in a situation where if we are not seeing people rejoice or be happy in the same way that we think they should, and so we're saying, well, we obviously cannot do this together now. Where is their joy being grounded in?
The outward expression. So almost like the masking that we talked about.
It is masking at that point, right? And this is unfortunately what a lot of us have experienced growing up that have grown up within churches. Masking is a big thing. Especially within white evangelicalism, masking is a big thing. And there's a reason I am being very specific here about it being white evangelicalism. We can't walk into church looking down and depressed, because that's going to make other people feel down and depressed, and we're supposed to be joyful here. So just put a smile on and shake the person's hand next to you and say, isn't it great to be in the house of the Lord today? When somebody says, how are you feeling? You say what?
Blessed.
Blessed.
Blessed and highly
favored.
Good.
Blessed and highly favored. Even though you barely were able to get yourself out of bed, not because you're lazy, but because you barely could get yourself out of bed today. You're still supposed to say you're blessed. But what does that actually mean to be blessed? We don't know. Yeah. It just sounds better than, oh, I'm having a rough day today.
Yeah.
We mask because we don't, but when we say it's because, well, God doesn't want us to be unhappy. But what we're really saying is I can't worship God if you're unhappy, because you're going to make me unhappy now. And if we're unhappy, then we're saying God isn't all good. And if we're saying God isn't all good, then why are we here? Which is why many of us have never actually studied the word lament outside of just knowing that there's a book about it in the Bible that we never read from, unless it's a funeral. And even then, we may not, because we don't want it to be a lament. We just want it to be a celebration of life. That is what many of us have dealt with. But any of us that have spent any time within historically black churches, any other kind of multicultural style church, any other culturally ethnic church, will be able to tell you very quickly that that is not the common way of doing things. Anybody that in any kind of work doing inner city ministry knows, regardless of the ethnic background, you're not going to be able to do anything if that is what you are doing. Black church especially, and the reason we go to this is because this is part of where even some of the hymns we have in the white hymnals are coming from, and we don't even know it. The black church was founded on the fact of joy in the midst of suffering. The only reason there's a black church is because they were not allowed to worship with the whites, and yet they rejoiced in the midst of not having the same resources, in the midst of because they had the same God, and they experienced the promises that God had brought about for them. Yeah. And so they rejoice. But in that rejoicing, they can also acknowledge the fact that things are not going good. And so we lament together as a community and then rejoice knowing that God is going to fulfill his promises to put himself in the midst of it.
Yeah. I like what you said before about part of this is in a collective space of community and just the need for that, because there's the coming alongside the person and recognizing the situation and the space that they're in, but then also that reminder of we need that sometimes of like, well, look at where God is still good.
Right.
Despite your circumstances, because we've all been there, right? You feel like you're at the bottom of the hole, nothing can go right for you that day. And so for somebody to still point out, and again, there's the right way and the wrong way, which we've talked about, of, hey, these are ways that God is still good despite you not having the nicest car or house on the block. Like that, like sometimes we get into it that way. But I think even with the community sense, there is the space where we can help other believers be reminded of and rejoice in God.
We have to actually understand what the goal is. Mm-hmm. Because unfortunately, some people immediately triggers them, because we've seen people try to do that before. But what they try to do is, well, just be happy because look, God's you're not dead, so obviously you should be thankful. Mm-hmm. That is not joy. That is transactional happiness.
Yeah.
Because then you're also going to say, when that person is dead, well, we can rejoice because they're dead and we know where they went. It's a transactional happiness. That is not community. That is you not wanting to get involved with their dirt. Because sometimes what is needed is to just recognize, yeah, things are not okay. Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus already knows he's going to raise Lazarus. Mm-hmm. But he still takes the time to weep. Because things are not okay.
Yeah.
Lazarus dies. Jesus is not there with the family. The family knows that Jesus could have been there if he wanted to. Things are not okay. Even though everything is going to be okay. The promises of God are still there. Mm-hmm. Things are not okay right now. And so it's okay for us to process this together as a community. And it's actually better that we process it as a community, because if we process it as a community, when we see the goodness of God show back up, now we can rejoice as a community as well. Mm-hmm. That's a big difference than saying just put on a happy face because you walked into the building today and now you're blessed.
Yeah.
That is actually experiencing what it means to be blessed by God, mm-hmm. as opposed to just saying we are blessed to avoid actually having to deal with it.
Yeah.
And that does fall into the difference between patience and the other word that is used for it a lot of the time, and that we haven't used yet, but we're going to, even though we kind of did in the definition, is patience being associated with the idea of long suffering. What's long suffering, Brandon? Besides it being something that sounds like it's only out of the King James.
It's just the ongoing, say, like trials and
suffering, right?
Yeah,
this is the one time you can use the word with the word.
I'm trying not to.
But this is typically how it is always. This is typically something that we don't associate with patience outside of when we're reading James. Mm-hmm. When we read the King James, long suffering is in there, and so we use it. But then when we talk about patience, we talk about just waiting. But we already talked about the fact that's not what patience is in any language. Yeah. Patience is a long suffering. But why then would we have joy and long suffering together as fruits of the Spirit if joy, where I talked about, is not worrying about the suffering? Mm-hmm. But then we're also supposed to have patience, which is long suffering. How do those things go together?
I think to some sense there's work being put in, or God's doing work through you in it too. The way that we like to think of patience is we just put it on a shelf there in the corner, and we put this plant in the corner. We want the one that doesn't need sunshine, doesn't need watering, but will still...
Well, I will say, some of us, it's not a lack of patience for that. Some of us is yeah. So we're not... If you don't have a green thumb, it doesn't mean you're impatient. It may just mean that God meant for you to care for the earth in a different way.
But we look for the plant that doesn't need sunshine or water or any nutrients, that if we just set it in the corner, it's going to grow on its own. That's like the magic pill that we want. And with true patience, it's going to take the laboring and the time to go through and work that you're putting in for the true patience to happen, because again, there's the transformation on the other side, and it's going to take work to be put in, and then there's joy in that. I'm going to have a lot more joy when I see that plant that is now blossoming and giving me fruit if I've spent time with it day in and day out, nurturing it, watering it, giving it food, versus the one that I just put in the corner in 6 months that there's lemons at the end of the tree.
Which is interesting, because isn't that how we typically talk about the fruits of the Spirit?
Mm-hmm.
It's the plant in the corner that just automatically blooms, as opposed to the one that actually has to be tended and worked.
Yeah.
Which is part of why we end up having to do these sort of things, is that's why we don't have a good understanding of what some of these fruits actually are. Because again, we're back to Romans 12, and the fact that this comes from a renewal of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just well, I can learn to be patient. We can learn to be patient without the Spirit. We already talked about that. It is something that can be learned, but it's much harder to learn when we are not dealing with the fact that we have a master gardener that isn't going to kill the plant.
Mm-hmm.
And that will tend and water it, and not just produce patience, but will also produce joy in the midst of the patience, love in the midst of the patience, faith in the midst of the patience, goodness, kindness, self-control. All of these sort of things, wisdom
Mm-hmm.
is produced. Real wisdom, not a counterfeit wisdom. These are the sort of things that only come when we are dealing with it as a fruit of the Spirit, and not just as a counter to the fruit of the flesh,
Mm-hmm.
which is typically what we actually want to see. And this is the other thing that people aren't giving non-Christians enough credit. Most of the things that are on the list of the fruits of the flesh are things that people don't want.
Yeah, no one really.
It's just a natural response to things, and it can be worked on, and you can get out of some of those things. But it's much easier when we don't have to do it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's longer lasting. It's long suffering when we don't have to do it ourselves. And it benefits everybody when we don't have to do it ourselves. I don't have to just say no to something in order for me to get past it. I still can say no to something, but I can say no to something knowing that even if I end up accidentally saying yes sometime, God's grace is still sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
So the joy still remains, even in the midst of me still having outbursts of anger, still in the midst of lies, still in the midst of conceit, still in the midst of all these other things. God's grace is sufficient is attached to the fruits of the Spirit, which is why we said there's still more fruits of the Spirit to go even after we get through all, because it's not about peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control. It's about all of these things working together for the good of the love of God.
Mm-hmm.
That is what patience looks like as a fruit of the Spirit.
The other component of that too, again going back to knowing God's care, things with patience, it's knowing that God has something better for us on the other side if we just wait.
Yeah.
And so let's just say,
and that's where we're going to push a little bit further and actually look at passages dealing with that. So I think you already have one of them up. Which one do you have up?
I've got 1 Peter.
All right, I've got James 1. And I realized that after I put the verses down that I left out a bunch of verses for James. So we're going to read more than what I have on your notes. But we're gonna read these passages, and then you're gonna finish your thought,
Mm-hmm.
because your thought is dealing with these passages, even though we haven't read them yet, and that's why I'm stopping you in the middle of it.
Don't go yet.
So this is James 1.
You didn't tell me to be patient.
Yeah, be patient, Brandon. Be
Thank
patient.
you.
We're starting in verse 2, and we're gonna go until I decide that I'm done reading. Because I've lost my patience. Consider it a great joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you experience various trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith without doubting, for the doubter is like the surging sea, driven and tossed by the wind. That person should not be expected to receive anything from the Lord, being double-minded and unstable in all his ways. Let the brother of humble circumstances boast in his exaltation, but let the rich boast in his humiliation, because he will pass away like a flower of the field. For the sun rises, and together with the scorching wind dries up the grass. Its flowers fall off, and its beautiful appearance perishes. In the same way, the rich person will either wither away while pursuing his activities. Blessed is the one who endures trials, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. No one undergoing a trial should say, I am being tempted by God, since God is not tempted by evil, and he himself doesn't tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when he is drawn away and enticed by his own evil desire. Then after desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like the shifting shadows. By his own choice he gave us birth by the word of truth, so that we would be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. My dear brothers and sisters, understand this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. For human anger does not accomplish God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourselves of all immoral filth and evil that is so prevalent. Humbly receive your implanted words, which is able to save your soul. But be doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Because if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like someone looking at his own face in a mirror. For he looks at himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of person he was. But the one who looks intently into the perfect law of freedom and preserves it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer who works, this person will be blessed in what he does. If anyone thinks he is religious without controlling his tongue, his religion is useless. He deceives himself. Pure and undefiled religion before God the Father is this: look after the orphans and widows in their distress, and keep oneself unstained from the world. So we went all the way through, because the first verse is the one that's dealing with joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Consider it great joy. Well, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Well, he says it. Consider it great joy when you experience what?
Various trials.
Trials, testing of your faith, because it will produce what?
Steadfastness, endurance,
long-suffering, patience. Consider it joy to have to work on your patience. Uh-oh.
Aren't you happy you're going to suffer, Andrew?
Right. Consider it joy that you are going to have to work through everything. But he doesn't stop there. Let your patience have its full effect, and it says endurance, but we know that's the same thing. That's why we're changing the words a little bit here. Let your patience have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. Now we're in trouble. In order for us to have full joy, we must have full patience, lacking nothing. And then he says, oh, you're lacking something. So if you lack wisdom, which we already said is a fruit of the Spirit, ask for it. Well, that's easy. Why isn't the other ones that easy? We have to get joy, we have to go through trial, but to get wisdom, we just have to ask for it. But this is why we have to ask for it. Because we have to ask for it in what? Faith.
Mm-hmm.
We're back to another fruit of the Spirit. And if we ask for it in faith, then we will not be like the surging sea driven, tossed by the wind, which is half of the list that we had as far as the fruits of the flesh, right?
Yeah. And
then we're back to, if you are of humble circumstances, we should what? Boast. Rejoice. Joy is again attached to humility. In this case, we're talking about humble circumstances, and now we understand again why we said contentment was a fruit of the Spirit. Because contentment brings about joy.
Yeah.
And then he goes further, and now if you endure the trial, you are what? Blessed. Which is what we already said is what we want to claim we are, even when we're not, because we don't want to have, either we don't want other people to get involved with our mess, or other people don't want involved in our mess. Mm-hmm. And then as we go through, it says everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. We're back to patience. The English definition even. We're back to patience. Because human anger doesn't accomplish God's righteousness. Patience is not just about joy, it's also about righteousness. And then it says to be doers of the word and not hearers. Being doers is what we already said is the part that we don't always talk about when we talk about patience, because we want to just wait. It's not just about waiting. It's about everything that we just went through up above. It's about faith. It's about love. It's about joy. It's about contentment, peace, all of these things that produce righteousness, a renewed mind. And we have to actually go about the process of doing it, which is practicing patience, being slow to anger, slow to speak, and quick to listen. And be doers of this word and not hearers, because if you hear it and don't do it, what are you even doing? And it will eventually show itself as, and this is the part that is also why we are doing this, as far as what joy actually is, what patience actually is, because these are words that have been used a lot this election season already. But this is what actual joy, actual patience looks like, is looking after the orphans and widows in their distress, suffering, long-suffering, while keeping ourselves unstained. There's way more involved here than just being able to be happy all the time or just waiting. These things are all tied together. Now go into 1 Peter, which is what you had. And I'll make sure that I actually gave you the right verses here, because I didn't the last time, apparently.
I think we have 1 Peter 1, 8 through 9.
Yeah, I gave you the wrong verses too. Let's do 3 through... We'll go 3 through the end of the chapter also. I read a whole chapter, you can too.
Right, in chapter 1.
Yeah, we got the chapters right on my phone.
Just making sure.
We got the chapters right. There's nothing else.
All right, 1 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 3. Blessed be God and the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the testing genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Concerning this salvation, the prophets who prophesied about grace that was to be yours searched and inquired carefully, inquiring what person or time the Spirit of Christ in them was indicating when he predicted the sufferings of Christ and the subsequent glories. It was revealed to them that they were serving not themselves but you, in the things that have now been announced to you through those who preach the good news to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, things into which angels long to look. Therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your mind fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as he who called you who is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, "You shall be holy, for I am holy." And if you call on him as Father, who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile, knowing that you were ransomed from the future ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver and gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of the Lamb without blemish or spot. He was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but was made manifest in the last times for the sake of those who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. Having purified your souls by your obedience to the truth for a sincere brotherly love, love one another earnestly from a pure heart, since you have been born again, not of perishable seed, but of imperishable, through the living and abiding word of God. For all flesh is like grass, and all its glory like the flower of grass. The grass withers, and the flower falls, but the word of the Lord remains forever.
There's one more sentence there.
And this word is the good news that was preached to you.
This is the good news that was preached, right?
Mm-hmm.
That all flesh is like grass, and all its glory like a flower. The grass withers, flowers fall, but the word of the Lord endures forever. And it says, this is the gospel that was preached to you. That is not quite as... it's much more poetic of a gospel than most of the others get, right?
Yes.
But there's a reason that Peter says this, and we're going to go all the way back up, because this is very similar to what we just read in James. The way that joy is seen is through what again? Suffering. Joy is seen through suffering, and that suffering is coming from faith, verse 5. And this is not only that, but this is the inheritance that you are receiving, is that you will get, that through faith you will experience suffering that produces joy. This is part of your inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's also just worth noting, and this is why we're adding this to the fruit of the Spirit talk, is verse 4, that inheritance is imperishable, undefiled, unfading, kept in heaven. All of those things are the exact opposite of the words that are used for the fruits of the flesh in Galatians 5. So Peter is dealing with the same sort of thing here. He just isn't using the same imagery that Paul did. But faith produces suffering, which produces joy. But only if you are doing so through what? Faith, one, but more than faith, we are doing it with patience again. So patience in the midst of suffering, faith in the midst of suffering produces joy in the midst of suffering. And it is a faith that is more valuable than gold, refined by fire. Now we're back to the renewing of the mind. You have not seen him, but you love him, and you rejoice. And this is the big one in verse 8, with inexpressible and glorious joy. What does that mean? Why is joy inexpressible?
It doesn't have to be an outward expression.
This is the problem, right?
Yeah.
Joy cannot actually be pinned down and expressed in a way that is actually understandable to anybody else. Mm-hmm. Which is why we end up with the problem that we have of trying to put our own expectations of joy onto other people. But it says right here, rejoice with inexpressible glorious joy. We can't even begin to express what this actually means. And this is, again, part of why we have the problem of people trying to separate joy and happiness out, as joy is Christian and happiness is secular. Because joy cannot be expressed. But what kind of joy? This is a different type of joy, because this is a joy that is produced through patiently suffering joyfully through our faith. There is this very specific experience that is what has produced this type of joy. Not because joy is not accessible to anybody else. This type of joy is one that only can come from these kind of expressions of faith, which is the definition you gave earlier, as far as you are seeing a promise of God that was given to you. Mm-hmm. It is completely different than just being happy about the fact that your team won, which is also a type of joy. This is a joy that is coming from experiencing what God has for you.
And that really comes with the deeper connection of knowing God, of who his character is.
Which is verse 10, right? Mm-hmm. Concerning this salvation that the prophets prophesied about the grace that would come to you, searched and carefully investigated. It is about the salvation that you had been, long awaiting, that came from the sufferings of Christ, and that it was revealed to the prophets and to you. It's a promise that you received. They were announced to you through those who preached the gospel by who? Verse 12. The Holy Spirit. A gospel that was given to you by the Spirit. The same Spirit that is the one that is going to allow you to have faith, that is going to allow you to endure, that is going to allow you to see joy in the midst of suffering, and experience the love of Christ through it, because Christ experienced the same suffering. Then he is the one also that has sent the Spirit to now communicate that to you. And it says angels even wish they could have this. And then once we have those things, what does Peter go into? So if that's the case, then you should be able to live with action, sober-minded, hopeful. We're back to, again, the opposites of the fruits of the flesh. And if we do these things, we no longer will be conformed to the desires of our former ignorance. We're back to Romans 12, right? Don't be conformed, but instead be transformed through
the renewing of our mind.
The renewing of our mind, and that renewing of our mind is exactly what we talked about in verse 16. So be holy because I am holy. If the Spirit is the one doing these things, then holiness is what will come out, which is what we just said in James 1, right? It's not just a joy and a patience, it's a joy and a patience that produces righteousness, holiness. As we work our way through, we continue to see all these things pouring out, including brotherly love and everything. And then we get to what Peter is saying is the gospel. The flesh is like grass, its glory like a flower. The grass withers, the flower falls, but the word of the Lord endures forever. Joy is what that is supposed to produce in us. But it's a joy that's produced in us because we know that the word of the Lord endures is long-suffering with us. This is where the difference comes in as to what the fruit of the Spirit of joy and patience actually are. Joy and patience come from the Spirit working in us through the midst of trials. But it's not just, oh, I didn't get the close parking space today. What are the examples that we had in here? With James, it was need, right?
Yeah.
Major needs. Physical needs.
Yeah, seeing or doing and not seeing.
Doing and not seeing was the bad, doing and not seeing, all these other things. But it was care for the poor and the widows is what was produced because you now know what it's like. It was a faith that produces righteousness, which is the doing and not seeing. But it was a faith that manifests itself because we're not just sitting here, we're doing it. Peter, it's what? It's about fighting off our sinful desires, right?
Yeah. Of being holy because Christ is holy.
Be holy because Christ is holy. It's about recognizing grace in the midst of suffering. And so we have both spiritual suffering, whether that is sin or not. And what I mean by or not is that what we have with both Peter and James is the fact that spiritual suffering oftentimes was sin that you're dealing with yourself. But it also sometimes was an external spiritual suffering of persecution. Those kind of sufferings produce joy through endurance, patience. Or you go the physical route out of James, physical suffering that leads to a recognizing of God's grace, produces a joy through the enduring of our faith. So what does that look like? What does that mean? It means that one, these are fruits of the Spirit because of the fact that we were promised persecution in the first place. These are also fruits of the Spirit because we are also promised that, like Paul says, we are still going to do what we don't want to do and not do what we want to do. That kind of suffering is going to take place for the Christian at some point. We don't have to go out looking for it. It's going to come.
Yeah, and I think that's what we...
And it produces something different also. Because where you were about to go, as far as what we like to do as far as the persecution complex, what happens when either that problem has been taken care of, or it turns out everybody recognizes the fact that you made up the hatred towards you, or you deserve the hatred towards you in the first place? What happens? Is joy what is produced?
No.
What's produced?
Anger.
Anger.
Yeah.
And we already read in James, what happened is anger something that is produced from God?
No.
No.
It's of the flesh.
It's the flesh.
And to be reminded in there too that in James that God doesn't tempt us.
And God does not tempt us, so why would anger be the production of a fruit of the Spirit? when it's already the fruit of the flesh. Persecution also comes from patience. If you feel like, well, I must not be a Christian because I'm not being persecuted, maybe stop and think for a second. Is it that you are just supposed to be wading through this as far as, is my faith real even without the testing? Is that maybe the test itself?
Yeah, because I think sometimes we get into the space of trial and we immediately throw up our hands of, time to fight back. This is my time to pick up my sword and fight. Where, yeah, as it talks about too, of like, weigh the cost of discipleship. And there's a cost to a lot of this, and there's the suffering that we don't like to think of and prepare ourselves for a lot of times. So when it happens, our natural body response is fight or flight.
Yeah, and that's what it is. And this, we're back again to the point where I don't know how many times I've said this over the past couple of years. Some of the funniest things is when you show Christians, especially the Christians that are so much of 6-day creation, so much of every word is literal, every word is dictated type of inerrant. A lot of their beliefs are actually grounded in Darwinism, not in what we just read. Fight or flight is Darwin.
Yeah.
Fight or flight is the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
But what does Peter say? Suffering produces endurance and joy.
Yeah.
Paul is the one that is the whole, is also a, persecution leads to endurance, endurance to faith, faith to love, all these other things. James just did the same thing in James 1. All of this is laid out as the fact that this is part of how God renews us.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this. Those of you that watched Kingdom on the Road, we talked about the Kingdom Road last week when we were going through sacrifices and things like that in Numbers. Again, what people forget about with the law and the sacrifices, it was all about the community and the fact that everybody was on equal footing, and that equal footing was designed not to make equality, but to design a way for people to be willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's why everywhere in Leviticus, when we talk about who is bringing the offering, it doesn't matter if they were a king or a chieftain or a priest themselves, or if they were just some peasant. When they are coming to present the offering, everybody is labeled as the offerer. There is no distinction. You are the offerer bringing your offering to God. That's it. Because the community aspect, in order for the community to survive, required everyone to be real and not put the masks on.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes as believers, we like to be the community of Job's friends.
Right. Who all got rebuked, by the way.
Yes. But, you're suffering? You must have done something wrong. You must have sinned. Oh, you're suffering? Your kids must have done something wrong. Your wife must have done something wrong. So that's the other side as believers where, again, we forget that the suffering is a part of this. And so when you're going through something, we're like, well, you just did something wrong.
And the interesting thing with Job specifically is that the greatest example that I have found of actually what Peter and James were just talking about, what Paul has been talking about, what Jesus even talks about as far as what will happen when the Spirit comes upon and people will experience patience beyond understanding, all these other things, is found in Job. First chapter again, verse 21. Or we'll start in 20 actually. It says, then Job stood up, tore his robe, shaved his head, he fell to the ground, and he worshipped. This is right after he found out that everything has been taken from him. He stands up, goes into mourning, but that mourning is defined as
worship.
And he says, naked I come from my mother's womb, naked I will leave. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That is what joy looks like.
Yeah. The part that always marvels me, I'll say it for Job, is like chronologically it's towards the beginning of time, and so he didn't have the Bible and like all these resources that we have today to like look back and like, oh, here's all these things that I can look back on life of Jesus.
Even God, when he gives his examples, it's all creation.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like, well, look what I did for Moses, look what I did for Abram. It's, you weren't here when I started this whole, do you throw the lightning? Do the mountain goats, ask you if it's time for birth? Where did you get your mountain degree, mountain birthing degree? Like, what is all this? It's all about God as creator still, because that is what people know. We have the advantage of seeing thousands of generations doing this.
Yeah.
Job doesn't have that, but yet Job's initial response is worship because of the fact that he has faith. And that faith produces a joy that is inexpressible, that is about rejoicing, and that rejoicing allows him to endure. And so he's able to have patience even in the midst of his wife telling him to kill himself, in the midst of his friends telling him that he's the problem. He has the patience to endure. And the only thing that breaks that patience to endure is his own prayers for more patience to endure. He doesn't necessarily do it right, and God lets him know that. But even when God rebukes him, in the end, the joy and faith has produced what? Righteousness.
Yeah.
Because he is able to humbly drop back in the shadow and let God shine, and because of that, God raises him back up. Patience is not just waiting. Patience is an act of suppressing our desire for things to happen now. And you can do that one of two ways. Either you can try and do it yourself, which might work for a while, but probably won't work very long, and it may not even be healthy. Unless you are doing it actually healthy with our ways. That's a whole nother discussion. We've had it with Joel. Or you can let the Spirit do it for you. Much easier to do it that way.
Yeah.
The Spirit has a much better track record than we do.
Or you might miss out on the blessing.
And you're going to miss out on the blessing. You will definitely miss out on the blessing. There is no if there. It's a you will miss out on the blessing. Well, because part of the blessing is the fact that you have the Spirit. That is part of the blessing.
But the cool part in a lot of that is our sinful nature. So I think of like Noah, Abraham, the guys that knew the promise, still took their own journey, messed up and sinned, and kind of tried to do their own thing or maybe ignore it. Jonah. But God still, it was like, this was my plan. This is still my greater purpose. Like, I am physically bringing you back on track.
Right. That's part of what we read with the whole idea of being hearers or being doers and not hearers. Hearing it, great. I'm blessed. Doing it, I can come in not ready to go.
Yeah.
And be able to still say I'm blessed. And that will produce a joy that is inexpressible. That allows us to rejoice through lament, not just through the happy praise dance. That allows us to do all these different things because the joy that is produced through patience produces a righteousness. And a righteousness that comes from a renewed mind that focuses back on the will of Christ, where now we are going to try and make other people's lives, their suffering, less. It's much different than just waiting. It's much different than saying be patient or joy. You can have joy and patience and not be a Christian, but you are not experiencing the full blessing outside of letting it be the fruit of the Spirit working in you. So let us know what you think, if we completely screwed it up or not. At Ministry Misfit everywhere. Shout out to John Cena, who now follows the Misfits on Twitter.
That was hilarious.
It was great.
Good update this week.
Yes, that I think that was also, and you have helped me be patient and waiting for responses from you on text messages.
Yes.
But that was, I think, the quickest response I've ever gotten from you on a Monday morning as well. Yeah, but go check out social media at Ministry Misfit on just about everything. If you are on Threads, make sure to go follow Misfits because we were trying to get our algorithm fixed. We don't know what happened. Somehow we got put in the wrong algorithm at the beginning because all of our posts were only being seen by self-professed paganists, Satanists, atheists who had no other desire but to try to like completely derail everything that we were doing with any conversation. So we're trying to fix it.
Probably the misfit word.
Maybe we're slowly getting it corrected. But if you're on Threads and haven't, just go follow. If you don't even have to necessarily like do any interactions with us, but if you follow us, it'll at least get us back to the right algorithm for a while. So, yeah, go follow us on social media. You can also check out all the stuff we're doing over on Patreon, patreon.com/MrMisfits. Tamiko and I are stuck, man. We have been trying for months to finish Daniel. We got through Daniel 5. That was in February. Or March, we were in Daniel 5. Or we're in what now? Going into September? Yeah. We're still in Daniel 5. We haven't been able to finish recording because neither one of us are available
and
to record.
School starts back, so
yes.
Patience.
Patience, yeah. See, we are helping you with your patience right here. But patreon.com, you can find the Galatians Bible study where we talked about this stuff before. And Brandon and I did actually finish it in one sit down.
Yeah.
Tamiko and I are slowly working through Daniel. You also get early access to some of the episodes, early access to some of the blogs, some exclusive merchandise, things like that. So go check that out, patreon.com/MrMisfits. We are hoping also to be getting the network site up and running here soon. Don't know when it's going to happen, but we're working slowly on it. Joe and I are finally able to sit down and get back at it. Also, if you are interested, we are going to try this out, probably more so next summer, but we're going to try to work it a little bit here this fall as well. We had requests in a group chat, and then also some of the people on Threads, that we start to do Misfit style live stream Q&As. The only time I can do that is the little bit of time that I am able to actually do self-care type stuff myself, patience, joy, is while I'm out fishing. So we are going to try and start up at some point it'll probably be Instagram Live is the one that's the easiest to go for, or it'll be the YouTube Live. We'll let you know once we figure that whole thing out, where you'll be able for like 15 minutes to an opinion on what the...
Depends how good your fishing ability is.
No, it actually depends on if anybody wants to talk or not. You can ask theology, ministry related question type stuff, and then if it's something I can't answer right there, we'll answer right there. If it's something that I'm going to need to go back and do some resourcing for first, we'll get back to you the next time we do it.
We need to make it like Misfit Christmas, and if you don't know the answer,
give them the option to buzz me
you jump in the lake.
Yeah. I'll bring you and throw you in the lake. How about that? Patience, right? Yes. Anyway. Yeah. So stay tuned for that kind of stuff. We're also hoping Joe and Brandon and Tamiko have all been helping me design merchandise because why not? For that kind of stuff also. So be on the lookout for that. But you can check that out. Again, that's part of the reason why you should go follow us on social media so you can stay tuned for all that good stuff. Eventually, Joe and I also are going to get to our promise, patience of actually unpacking Project 2025. So if you thought we had forgotten, we haven't forgotten. We are going to get to that. Brandon will be back here eventually. He's got exciting, joyful news coming here very soon as well.
Yep.
And so we will let him get back to that exciting news, and we will see the rest of you next week.
The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Ministry Misfit Media in association with Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers, and Brandon Simmons is associate producer. The Ministry Misfits theme song is written and produced by J.D. Laird and Laird Creative Agency. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com or by following @ministrymisfit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also visit our website at www.ministrymisfits.com or through bio.link/ministrymisfits. If you would like to support Ministry Misfits, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/MisfitsMedia. facebook.com/ministry misfits.